Welcome everyone to the Ethics in AI Colloquium here at Oxford. My name is John Tasulis. I'm the director of the Institute for Ethics in AI. The title of our colloquium today is Algorethics, thinking about the techno-human condition. And I'm delighted to say that our main speaker is Father Paolo Benanti, who has been a member of the Franciscan Order since 1999. He is professor of moral theology, ethics of technology, and neuroethics at the Gregorian University. He is the author of many books and articles, including Human in the Loop 2022 and Homo Faber 2018. Father Benanti also serves on various Vatican committees concerned with educational, academic, and scientific matters, and he has a special responsibility in that connection with matters to do with artificial intelligence. So we're extremely happy to welcome Father Benanti here today. We're also extremely fortunate to have two outstanding commentators, the first of whom is Baroness Honora O'Neill, one of the world's leading moral philosophers, whose work has been extremely influential and ranges across fundamental issues in ethics to questions in practical ethics about trust and accountability, justice and borders, and the ethics of communication. She's the former principal of Newnham College and a former president of the British Academy. Her most recent publication, or at least in book form, is Philosopher Looks at Digital Communication, published by Cambridge University Press in 2022, which calls for a more expansive understanding of ethics in this domain, one that situates rights of free speech and privacy in a wider normative context. Our second commentator is Professor John Finnis, one of the world's leading philosophers of law, who has been at the forefront of the revival of the natural law tradition during the last 4 decades. He's the author of the seminal work Natural Law and Natural Rights, published in 1980 by OUP, as well as other works in moral, political, and legal philosophy, many of them collected as essays in 2011. He's emeritus professor in Oxford's law faculty, and he's an honorary King's Counsel, and also a companion of the Order of Australia, Australia's highest civilian award, which as a patriotic Australian, I thought I particularly had to mention. So rather than any further ado, I'm going to pass over now to Father Benanti for his talk. Father.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure and an honor to try to do with you a little journey, actually questioning technology. I would like to be clear. I will try to leave the privilege simple to questioning technology and not to answer to the question that it will produce tonight. First of all, I feel in the obligation to try to make it clear what is the perspective of someone that defines itself like a scholar in ethics of technology. What does it mean? Just to make it a little bit clear, is not a way to say if evolution or innovation or in some way developing of new technology is good or bad. What you see projected behind my shoulder is 2 pictures of the same day, Easter, Sunday, Easter. This is actually not my volunteer, but it happened. On the Easter morning of the starting of the last century, 5th Avenue, New York, Easter morning of 1913, same place, same city. On the left picture, you see there are no cars. On the right pictures, there are no horses. Okay, usually when I love to provocate my student, I ask, what do you think? If you was in the supply chain of the horses, your life was really changed. But a new supply chain, that is the car supply chain, arise, a new job, new things, new other things could be produced. I have to confess that nowadays a lot of students say that the carbonization of the environment actually was really bad. But you know, as a scholar, I cannot not dig in, say, paper, and I found a number of Appleton magazine, 905, that say that the last summer was really tremendous for New Yorker, because 20,000 New Yorkers died for infection connected with mosquitoes with poo of the horses. So actually, in short term, innovation was really, really good. Well, that makes really critical and problematic to have a judgment on technology in that direction. And this is the reason why I don't want to judge innovation in this perspective, but I suggest to simply understand, at least for tonight, ethics of technology as a different way to questioning technology. How? Well, one of my professors simply bring us on the field and bring us to Manhattan, and in Manhattan bring this little class, we was 10, of PhD students, and he suggested us to look at the huge parkway, 6-lane highway that is connecting Manhattan to Long Island. And the question was, what do you see? Can you imagine 10 men making the PhD? Everyone would like to be the smartest guys in the room. We make a long list of things. The only two things that was really true was concrete and asphalt. Well, then he brings us back inside the library and give us a book that is the life of the major of the politicians of New York that made that kind of innovation. The name was Richard Moses. And the book is one of the best 100 non-fictional books sold in US market. What we learned inside the book was that Richard Moses has a really clear vision of the society. And according to him, it was the 40s of the last century, the best part of the city has to be for the best part of population. That in his mentality was white middle class. Well, to do that, what he did? First of all, there is no train connecting Manhattan to Long Island. And then the bridge that we see, like every bridge on every highway, was built 2 feet lower than the standard. No buses can drive to that highway. That was a really practical way to allow only people that own a car to reach the beloved Johnson Beach on Long Island. So what is at the end of the day the lesson that we learned? That every technological artifact is a displacement of power, is a form of order. So I would like to suggest you to questioning technology in this direction to understand what artificial intelligence could be and could produce inside society as a form of order, as a form of displacement of power. Well, if this is true for a special purpose technology, so you can put politics inside a technology, it's especially true for general purpose technology. The last big wave of a general purpose technology that we know was electrical power. So in this slide, you can see 2 of the major producers of distribution of electrical power. On the left, Samuel Insull, the founder of General Electric Company, that simply applied the model of democratizing electrical power. Lower the price, more family can acquire electrical power, we all use electricity. On the right side, I found this map that actually is of the first Goelro plane of Lenin, and it was thinking to produce a major Sovietization of the Russian through the distribution of electrical power. So when we face a general purpose technology, all we see a form of order, an Ordnung, to use German, or a Weltanschauung that could produce, acquire, and distribute through innovation. And so I have to be honest with my master, looking at technology, questioning technology as ethics of technology means not to give a normative solution to what's happening, but to be aware, to make aware the decision-making community of which kind of transformation, which kind of displacement of power, which kind of form of order are directly connected with this form of innovation. Well, at this point, I can open up the tonight questioning of AI, and I would like to do in 2 directions. The first direction is the ability that AI has to be a form of order and a changing of power for the individual human being existence. We would like to say as individual ethics question. The second one will be as a collective question, a societal societal question, because the way in which AI is distributed today is a new, very special way that we call platform. But let's go slowly, and let's enter inside this first question. To do that, I have to do some fast, probably too fast, flashback on what's behind the possibility to think tools like an artificial intelligence. I will present not tools tonight. I give for assured that everyone of us at least something about AI know. Well, the first thing is what happened when Shannon simply introduced the concept of information inside the public scene. Because he know that he has to apply this concept of information to bring the ability to bring a message from the two sides of the pond, from Washington to London. To do that, he introduced the concept of information, and when he has the necessity, when he has to say something about the information, he remembers something that his mentor of PhD was used to tell to him. Edward, if you would like to have no question, use entropy. Underline, entropy is a really difficult concept. And so he will use entropy in the sense of using the Maxwell mental experiment about the little devil that has to push back one molecule if it's not hot enough to pass in the hot side of the box. And he used it to define information as what is needed by the devil to understand which molecules could pass inside the box. So what the devil needs is a bit of information. 1, you pass. 0, don't pass. With this not well philosophical discussed foundation of information, he was able to make a really strong parallel between order and disorder, noise and information, in a computable way, like entropy is. And it opened up all the informational world that we know. After that, Schrödinger, Nobel Prize, tried to apply the concept of information to a really strange entity that was negative entropy entity, a living being. And he was thinking that there is a sort of kind of crystal inside every living being that was able to store this information and transmit generation by generation. At that point, I don't want to be unpolite, things arrived to Cambridge. And two young students tried to find this kind of crystal. They never find it, but they found a double helix of DNA, Watson and Crick. Well, from an engineer concept of information that was used to describe how things works, not how a life exists, but that should be another philosophical problem that I cannot face now, we have that information is really useful also to describe by human beings. But more interesting than that was another use of information that Shannon was ready to make. One of the first things that he built with the informational concept was something that you can see inside this grainy and dusty documentary that is still available on YouTube. There is a little mouse that eating the wall of a labyrinth, wired with a lot of things. He was used to work at AT&T, was able to change the direction and find the exit of the labyrinth. Well, if the machine in the 18th century was able to surrogate the human muscle and make the Industrial Revolution, a machine like this little mouse, the name was Theseus, is a machine that has a purpose, like an intelligent being. So information applied to the control of machine is changing the nature of the machine, giving to the machine something that was only of an intelligent being. It gave a purpose to the mouse. Well, these things was in some way clarified and schematized and published by Norbert Wiener, a genius mathematician, that call it cybernetic loop. The interesting things was what was made by a really brilliant woman, one of the group of the cybernetics, Margaret Mead, an anthropologist, that tried to apply this scheme not only to an engineer tools, but try to apply simple to something that we can describe as a system, was the arising of system theory. You can apply to a group of people in which signaling changed the behavior of people. You can apply to your brain, and you can describe what you do not like an ant, but like a series of circular causes that change your behavior. Neuroscience are arising from that. You can apply to human behavior like stimulus and effect. Well, what is interesting is what happened from this first moment. The first things was, like you see on the left, was what Wiener did. It called this cybernetic loop, in which a sensor was able to translate the reality in signal, and the feedback signal was able to change the behavior of machine. Actually, it's really interesting that everything is happening after the invention of transistor, but I have no time to go deep inside these kind of things. The problem was, and this is the problem that Wiener has, that the best sensor for the machine at that time was the human beings. Because can you imagine how a human beings could signaling to the machine in a really different way? Probably, if you remember some old movies on World War II, when you have anti-air artillery, you remember that there are 3 people at every pieces. One that is looking where the airplane is coming, one that is setting the high, and another that is setting the direction. Wiener was able to change the way in which the human being was the sensor for the machine, and with 2 simple clubs, you need only 1 man to handle the weapon. Wiener was a little bit countercultural at that time. He was scandalized that the use of the military was making of his understanding, and he said goodbye to the university. But what is interesting is the idea that was developed, is the epistemology that information applied to the process was able to introduce in understanding complex systems. The most interesting things, according to myself, is what happened when those ideas come back to the continent, from the New World come back to the continent. And well, the most interesting thing happened when Heidegger read the book of Norbert Wiener. You know, Heidegger was a German. He was used to say that we can think only into language, Greek and German. So when he wrote cybernetic loop, loop is too much English, Kuber is enough Greek for him. And he focused himself on what does it mean that information allowed us to Steuerung, to control the reality. And so in a short conference published in 1965, with one of these titles that Heidegger loved a lot, apocalyptic style, Das Ende des Denkens in der Gestalt der Philosophie, the end of thinkings in the age of philosophy, he was underlying 2 things. First, philosophy is not anymore needed, because if we can control reality, controlling is enough. Why we have to understand? The second thing was, well, if we put a human being and a machine on the same level, that is the level of information, we could be not anymore able to say if it's the human being that is the sensor that is controlling the machine, or if it's the machine that is the sensor that is controlling the human being. Translated to what happened today in our street, is it the finger of our kids that is controlling the smartphone? Or are the notifications of the smartphone that are controlling the human beings? So this idea of double-side controlling, I'm going fast because my time is running out, brings us to what we know about intelligence in human beings. And I would like to underline what Daniel Kahneman suggests to every one of us. Our intelligence usually works on 2 systems, system 1 and system 2. And system 1 is used 95% of time, is almost unconscious, fast, associative. It's an automatic pilot. I would like to make a joke, but out of Italian could be not well done. We will see up later. And then you have system 2, that is rational thinking, take effort, slow, logical, lazy, indecisiveness. Well, if I can use a metaphorical images, system 1 is like the intelligence that probably you see in tennis world champion. Someone make a service in Wimbledon, 180 kilometers per hour, without thinking so much, the return ace was able to put the ball at that corner immediately, unconsciousness, but it's a winning point. System 2, it's like Kasparov move in a chess match. So it's low, you have to think, you are not sure, but it takes a lot of effort. Well, probably you feel the difference between system 1 and system 2. If never happened that you was walking, probably with a friend of you, and you was talking, if at one point you have to stop to explaining what you would like to say, welcome, you switch from system 1 to system 2. And the joke was, that's really Italian style, when the husband told to the wife, yes, 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 that's system 1. Well, how system 1 is triggered in experiencing life? We know, with Daniel Kahneman Nobel Prize, by repeated experience, clear display, primate idea, good mood, that make it easy and let us feel familiar, feel true, feel good, feel effortless. So what I would like to suggest as one of the ethical questions that we can put questioning AI system in human relationship is that we could produce a huge, giant system 0, AI, that is constantly triggering system 1, allow us to acting in a way that is not enough rational as we wish. So questioning technology means which kind of space we would like to leave to human consciousness to take in charge the problem that we face. And this, if I may be provocative, it's really actual now, you know? Because as a Western, as a European, we face a crisis. Probably we exit from the modernity with the idea of moral duty, with Kant. But the idea of moral law and duty, I'm talking as an Italian, for us law is just an opinion, I know. But, the moral duty of Kant faced a huge challenger after World War II. Like Hannah Arendt showed to us, in the Eichmann process in Jerusalem, Eichmann has to kill 6 million people because it was his duty. It was his moral duty. So the shock of a moral duty that can force you to do something that is not real good shocked the culture. So the normativity of the ethics today, it's really problematic to suggest to our contemporary people. And in 1976, when Roland Barthes at Collège de France opened up his lecture, he said, the language is fascist. Why? Not because it do not allow you to say something, but because language forces you to say something in some way. Probably Roland Barthes, the grammatics, probably Roland Barthes was highlighting for every one of us how the culture is having a fatigue with the normative things. If you would like to have a practical aspect of this, we move from traffic light to self-regulating circle, traffic circle, in which you can regulate yourself. So in this lack of feeling with normativity, regulating behavior in a public sphere, it's really problematic. But we hate emptiness. And this is where AI, this feedback system of cybernetic loop, has a huge role. Because we discover that there is something that works very well, that is nudging and gamification. That an algorithm, an AI algorithm, can produce in a systematic way and can surrogate the lacking of accepted normative in society. Probably you know how, nudging was discovered. It is connected to the male bathroom in the Amsterdam airport. It was enough to paint a little fly in the male bathroom to make an half of the cost of cleaning the bathroom. This is a huge experiment on the male brain, but it's also something that say that you can write, please leave it clean, or you can write bigger, please leave it clean, and nothing happened, changing something in the way in which the signal touched the human beings, you produce a behavior. But this is something really new. If you look at how law and societal handling we were used to have. And this pushed us to what was probably the core of this changing of epistemological approach to information, driven to us through the AI algorithm today, that was really well understood by Margaret Mead. In this really informal interview, the title was For God's Sake, Margaret, she said, it was a solution to the problem of purpose. From Aristotle on, the final cause has always been the mystery. The wall of logic will have to be reconstructed for recursiveness. So this idea makes us to think, not in terms of freedom or individual freedom, but we can think to handle the behavior, the individual behavior, in terms of recursiveness of logic. This is why systems like that are really beloved but non-democratic state to control people in a way in which people cannot experience of themselves because it's connected to system one. Well, my time is really running out. What I would like to underline is the way in which we are distributing this system. Because, you know, the third books of logic that was quoted by Marx inside his works say that at one point, quantity is a quality. Well, the platform society is the quantity that is becoming a new quality. Why? Okay, there is an old way to say that when a finger points the moon, the fool look at the finger, not at the moon. I don't want to say that there is any fool. I need the moon. Why? Because if you see what happened behind my shoulder, there are the three cockpits of the space exploration that bring us to the moon up today. You have the Apollo 11, Shuttle Endeavour, and Crew Dragon that in the heart of the lockdown for the pandemic bring again people on the space orbit. Look how different they are. The first one, Apollo 11, it's, everything is mechanic. There is one computer aboard made by NASA in hardware and software because outside of the atmosphere, the radiation has an interference with calculational system. And when they was trying to go to the moon, the computer was used to calculate how the engine should react in a different gravity. There was an error 1202. Then the astronauts say that they remember that was not really an error. The real story was that because they have the Barnett patch that the wives of the dead astronaut give to them, they look in face and said, it's better to die now than to renounce. But they bring Apollo 11 on the surface of the moon with a computer that was able to do only one thing at that time. And also this one was made by a brilliant woman, and you can see the picture of the printed code that is inside the computer is higher than how much she was high. Well, in 10 years, the computer changed the position in control. It's a general purpose computer. Still made by the most powerful nation at that time, United States, in hardware and software. And well, he is an intermediation in every execution during the space mission. We arrive to Crew Dragon. As you can see, Crew Dragon has this fancy touch screen. Well, I make a formation meeting for Ferrari, and the first things that they was able to say, so the astronauts are not in control. You know, when you drive a 2G car, they know that in F1, you have to have really clear switch, because with 2G, your finger is not precise. So if the control is not hard switched, someone else is in charge. But they build it with a new system that is called COTS, customer out of the shelf. So because the mobile phone that we have in our pocket is 1,000 times more powerful than the computer that brings us on the moon, and is a lot cheaper, is enough to put 3 inside, And if all the three computers give the same results, it's practically impossible that an error pushed by a casual form of electricity was driven inside the calculation. So what they do was to have this private sector, what before was achieved by the most powerful nation in the world, now is a startup. But look at this. This is the next one. It's not yet launched, made by NASA. You can see one switch, one finger with finger protection. But look lower right, prices. So Apollo cost $30,000 million. Space Shuttle, $27,400 million. Crew Dragon, $1,000 million. You can say, is the evolution? No, because Orion, it will cost $24,000 million. This is what platform is making. Give you a really cheap execution of the process, becoming a middle layer in the execution in exchange of the control of the process. I don't know what happened here, but in Italy, when we go in lockdown, no school was prepared to make a distance learning. And so the platform offered the system, but they was in control of what's happening. So the platform economy that is driving now this AI solution to the market are making an exchange, are becoming a new political player that shift the society in another way. This is the second form of ethical question that I simply would like to suggest to you tonight. When we talk about algorithmics, is questioning how much of the freedom remain in the subject, is questioning what we are building inside society, what kind of decision-making are building inside society. And I would like to finish just simple posing another question, you know. One of the big questions in the modernity was the legitimate of law. Well, we know that this kind of algorithm can produce a behavior. The power of AI in the market is not simple that can anticipate what happened. But when Amazon is suggesting to you, probably you are interested also too, it's not only anticipating your interest, it's producing much more selling of that item. Something that is made by someone to produce a certain form of behavior is a really general definition of law. You know, probably you think that has to produce 100% of behavior. This is, you know, sorry, this is my cultural bias. In Italy, law sometimes produces some kind of behavior. But, okay, the problem of legitimacy, no, a really clear, at the end of the century, roles and theory of justice, formal constraint to make that a law is respecting the rule of law. The constraints are the law has to be knowledgeable, the law has to be universal, the law has to be general, then there are other two. Try to apply to this form of algorithm. Is it the algorithm knowledgeable? Okay, someone could think about open software. But 1982, the winner of Turing Award was giving his speech when he received the prize, and the title of the speech is Trusting the Trust. Once I compile the code, no one can understand it anymore. And during the compilation, I can inject any piece of software inside that do what I want. So the algorithms that works as a pseudo-law is forcing this first principle. Then the law has to be universal. An algorithm, like the one that I described, is a profiling tool. It's not universal. Third, has to be general. And Rawls was used to say, what is the difference between universal and general? Well, if I say everyone has to obey to Father Paolo, I love this law, well, it's universal because it's everyone, but the subject is just myself. For the algorithm, the subject is just the owner of the server. So this is probably the root tension in a societal approach to what AI is doing to our democracy. There is a tension between rule of law and how we shape behavior in society with these new pseudo-law tools that we call AI algorithms. And so the question is, should we go in the direction of algocracy? That, like, Heidegger told us, it works. It's working really well. Or should we think about algoretics? So a new way to question in technology, to recognize how order is made, how power is shifted by these new tools. It's interesting that we have a global challenge on that. And if we talk about human rights, Xi Jinping was saying that with this system, it is respecting more than us the human right. So the cultural challenge, the founding challenge, the ethical challenge to say which kind of right are not possible to ignore in the name of efficiency is the core question that Algorethics would like to ping on us, asking for an answer. Sorry to give no answer to that, but Algorethics is a way to questioning technology in a public space. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Father Pao. That was extremely interesting, and there's going to be a Q&A session where answers will be given. So, we'll look forward to that. Honora, you're next.
Well, I'm not sure that I could do justice to Father Benante's talk, but let me try to say something about the very idea of algorethics. I suppose we could start in a fairly timid way by thinking about some of the principles, by which I mean principles of action, practical principles, that might be relevant to the ethics of AI. This list is, I think, Father Benante's list in another publication: transparency, inclusion, responsibility, impartiality, reliability, security. When I read a list like that, I suppose I ask myself, is that list complete? If it's not complete, what's missing? Then I ask myself, is that list completable? Could we complete it? And how would we tell whether we had completed it? Is the list meant for the people who originate AI, or for AI itself, or for the users of AI? For whom is the ethics of AI intended, or for what? And why the prominence of transparency? That's a question I ask myself quite frequently. Transparency is a very new ethical principle. I think we can take it back to the 1990s, probably, just. And it clearly has something to do with the very technologies that we are talking about. But really, is transparency that important? Why has it gained such a reputation? What about some of the older, humbler, interesting principles that have been thought ethically important? For example, what about honesty, accuracy, completeness, clarity? Simpler stuff. Can we, as it were, step beyond those? But finally, I think I'm left with the question, are such lists either complete or completable? AI bears on so many things, but broadly we might tell ourselves it bears on communication and it bears on control. Are the same principles relevant for communication and for control? Or are different principles going to be relevant for different sorts of AI or different uses of AI? And are the norms, the standards, the principles of action all that is needed? How, in particular, should we address the question of indeterminacy? Historically, principles of action have always been seen as indeterminate, and therefore has generally been concluded their use in practice requires judgment as well as principles. But judgment comes in various forms. To take some classical distinctions, we have determinate judgment, the sort of judgment where we ask, well, is this bird a crow or is this bird a sparrow? And that classificatory use of judgment seems something that can be addressed by using an AI system. But what about reflective judgment? Reflective judgment asks questions like, what sort of a bird is this? Well, if you have a complete encyclopedic list of types of bird, that's not so difficult. But you don't always have encyclopedic lists. So is reflective judgment something that can be achieved by AI? And then we have, to my mind, interestingly, practical judgment. What should we do in this sort of situation or other sorts of situation? There may, moreover, be other types of judgment other than determinate, reflective, and practical. For example, is aesthetic judgment to be equated to any of those types of judgment? Or is aesthetic judgment something different? Perhaps AI does not or need not provide ways of resolving indeterminacy. But if so, there are going to be very large gaps to be filled which cannot, I think, sensibly appeal to algorithms. To summarize, algorithms are principles that provide definite instructions, but in many cases of great practical importance. There may be no algorithms, and we're going to have to think again. Thank you.
Well, I would love to talk about information and the different senses that the term information has in the thought of computational sciences and its place, by comparison, in, say, biological sciences, but not just biological, nanophysics as well. And the convergence, especially in the latter two fields, of the modern or the contemporary concept of information on the classical, say, Aristotelian conception of form. That's something I've thought and written a little bit about in the past, but I think I will restrain my remarks to the format that was laid out before us in two sources. One in the abstract for tonight's session, which frames most of my thoughts in terms of a question, and on the other hand, the title of Father Benante's interesting lecture, Algorethics, Thinking About the Techno-Human Condition. So that suggests a diagnosis and a prescription. The diagnosis is that we are in a techno-human condition. Well, what is that? In his 2016 book, Homo Faber, The Techno-Human Condition, Professor Benante says, on page 10, the techno-human condition refers more in general to the way in which man has always understood and implemented his existence as an interaction with the environment by means of instruments, technological artifacts. Then on page 78, we find four conclusory sentences with a footnote. Technology, thanks to the new instruments of the information and communication technologies, thus changes our human conception. The value of man is no longer seen in his being a person, but in his being, if we may use the term, embodied information. The techno-human condition must therefore also come to terms with the changes in the understanding of reality and life that the technological artifacts produce in man. Every single aspect of our existence is technologically mediated or enforced. Our lives are, in fact, enveloped by a shroud of technical artifacts that are interposed between us and the rest of reality and our relations with our kind. And my thought in response to those four sentences was that, no, we are not in any sober sense enshrouded or enveloped or changed in our understanding of reality and life by the information or communication technologies, though we will certainly notice and be in certain respects harmed if the substations are rocketed and the power goes off indefinitely. And then there's the prescription. I suggest rather, that we decline the invitation to adopt or seek a new algorethics. And I suspect that the previous set of observations were directed in the same sense, at least as questions. And let me just suggest 4 reasons which overlap. First, the criteria of moral or ethical truth are, in principle, well understood already, and already apply to all uses of techniques and technologies, old and new, prospective, without exception. Secondly, all applications, uses, and deployments of any information technology, however new, and whatever the complexity of its computational rules and communicative methods, are chosen, all these applications, uses, and deployments are chosen immediately or mediately by a particular person who is in designing, programming, building, and or implementing the technology and maintaining and overseeing its programs. For each and all of these free choices, he or she is morally responsible, planners and team leaders, of course, more so than team or bit players and users. Thirdly, on page 69 of Homo Faber, Professor Benanti says, if the ICTs permit, these technologies permit and realize a fusion between man and machine, then what we are witnessing is a reality that becomes techno-reality, and a man who becomes a techno-human, which we see in tonight's title again. But I think there's no possibility of a fusion of human persons and subhuman technologies, such as machines running information systems, except a physically transformative invasion of the bodily person at or after his or her conception. Every such invasion, unless intended and chosen for the prevention or restoration of impairment or disablement, categories that are admittedly open to some extent vague and open to discussion, is an act of unjust domination or enslavement already excluded by true moral propositions. Fourthly then, in programmatic talk of, for example, a common goal of humanity, of peace, inclusiveness, non-discrimination, freedom from interpersonal bias, and other concepts or propositions articulated in, for example, the Rome Call, sponsored by the Pontifical Academy for Life, I think we see a neglect of relevant moral truth. And again, Baroness O'Neill suggested this, I think. Without carefully articulated qualifications and supplementations, these exhortations and recommendations will promote injustice and bring ruin for many individuals, families, civil, including religious associations, nations, and other political communities. To mention a few of these ancient moral truths, ethical precepts, to add to those already suggested, foundational today as much as ever, as we can see from recent and ongoing misjudgments by institutions of public trust, so-called, is a wide and deep dedication to conscientious, intra- and interpersonal discursive search for true judgments about the relevant facts, both about the nature of things and about the historically given conditions and circumstances that bear on human existence and well-being now and foreseeably. Foundational, again, is the right to participate in the sustaining and appropriately increasing of families into the families into which one was born, with associated rights and responsibilities of parent and child. And again, justly stable and qualified appropriation of things to private owners for the sake of civil and political individual independence, as well as of common prosperity and autonomy in investigation and judgment, and so forth. Subsidiarity in general, fidelity to promises and reasonable expectations, practical recognition of criminal guilt and just, retributive, as well as compensatory liabilities, including liability for reckless or self-serving rollouts or regulatory approvals of technology. Finally, I suggest a caution about locutions that seem to deny or minimize the difference between human persons and subhuman realities, especially machines. Besides the locutions I began by mentioning, there's also, of course, artificial intelligence, easily heard with the suggestio falsi that there are or will be machines or artifacts that do or will share in those fundamental features of intelligence that are characteristic of intelligent human consciousness, assessment, deliberation, choices, and actions. And main characteristics, features of human intelligence are, I suggest, admirably discussed in the late David Hodgson's OUP books, The Mind Matters in 1991, and Rationality plus Consciousness equals Free Will, 2012, which were defended by him in wonderfully clear and calm critical discourse with all comers in philosophical journals and blogs, down to his death as the second book came off the press. I have an interest in this, especially because we were supervisees together from 1962 to 1965 of H.L.A. Hart, who, looking back, described him as the most able of all his supervisees. Plausible reasoning, as he explains, deploying insight after insight, that's more my terminology, his gestalt after gestalt, pervasively outrunning all computational rules and respecting but far outrunning all rules of deduction and induction, yields our factual and evaluative assessments of circumstances and possibilities, and thus of alternative immediate or more or less immediate futures. So a big qualification to the 95% versus 5%, huge qualification, possibly even some sort of reversal of that. Such reasoning, such plausible reasoning, makes it possible and practically necessary for each of us to freely choose to act for one of these futures rather than others, in conditions such that nothing save the choosing settles which of these alternatives will be actualized or at least attempted. No plausible, critically sustainable reason, he argued, and I agree, has been advanced to judge that any computational or other rule-based information system, device, or machine is or will be conscious or capable of such reasoning or able to make a free choice or be morally responsible or deserve the name machina sapiens, or commit itself or make itself responsible, let alone responsible for entering or conforming to articles of peace, as is suggested in the Rome call of the Pontifical Institute. In short, finally, human dignity and equality are, I suggest, imperiled, and more important truths, true metaphysical, anthropological, and moral and ethical truths, are overlooked if we are treating technologies as if the instruments, programs, and information deployed in them share the elements distinctive of the human condition, which by our radical capacities for consciousness, understanding, and free choice is categorically superior to all actual or prospective machines and makes us responsible for any harm we maliciously or neglectfully let them cause. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. So we've had a rich set of comments there. I'm sort of reluctant to try to summarize, but there is a certain kind of commonality of theme emerging, I think. Part of it has to do with the very idea of algorethics, whether, in fact, the set of principles that you've been associated with is substantively the correct set of principles. So there's been some pushback saying, look, I think Honora put it, that what about traditional moral principles? Are we forgetting them in the rush to focus on newfangled ideas like transparency? What about honesty, for example? But then I think there's another kind of concern that's emerging in the comments about this whole idea of a techno-human condition, whether that's effacing certain fundamental qualities integral to human dignity, in particular the capacity for certain kind of judgment that could never be superseded by any kind of automated machine process, algorithmic process. So that's two sorts of ways of summarizing some of the things that were said. Father Paul, I'll turn over to you now for a response. Clearly, you shouldn't feel obliged to respond to everything that's been raised. And then we will turn over to a Q&A, and that is with the audience present and also from those watching online, who I encourage to send their questions by means of the chat box function on YouTube. So, Father Paolo.
Thank you. The quality and the quantity of question, of course, exceed the time of my brief reply. Let me say this. Wrong call for AI ethics is the minimum agreement that we was able to find among government, technological institution, and other people. So it's the minimum. It's not the Algorethics. So on those principles, in this moment, some biggest company in the world was able to say, yes, we are able to reduce the amount of money that we would like to gain staying in the market to try to respect in some way those principles. And it's a minimum. It is the maximum threshold that we was able to fix in 2000. It's not the end of a process. Probably it's neither the start of the process, but was something symbolic that stayed there. It's a call. And probably the best things has to come, because after that there is at least two big things. One is Council of Europe that is negotiating a treaty on artificial intelligence. That is a next step. And then we have European Union with AI Act that probably is going further in another direction. The two things probably are overlapping. We don't know what's happening. But 2018, 2022, we see a lot of the attempt to do a lot of instruments to simply try to put some sort of guardrail because the machine could be out of the road. So I, honestly, also for the choice of life that I did, I believe a lot in the human beings and on the difference between human beings and car and machine. But it's not new in the history that as human beings, we can simply allow other living beings to make call, to make decisions that are not fully rational. In a case of an avalanche, a lot of time we allow a dog to tell us where we have to dig. And the dog has not the quality that we have to make a perfect moral choice. But we trust the dog. So, of course, it's not a problem to say that the dog is like the human beings. But in practical use, we are simply allowing the dog to guide us. And when you apply in a set of decisions that happen in a huge amount of time and so fast, the social impact of that should be in some way handled to avoid a really drastic effect on social life. This is what an attempt like wrong call, like other form of agreement international are trying to do. No one of these one is working well. I'm not a believer in that kind of instruments, but they work as a sort of light of awareness on the issues. And I hope that they will be in some way surpassed by other things, because that means that It's not anymore someone that is shouting, but it's a community that is going to regulate something. And then we come shortly to the second part of the question about human beings, you know. Of course, there is a huge philosophical need to have a sort of new comprehension of the specificity of what a human being is. Because to make short a long history, the difference between a living being and a machine in the age of information, it's becoming more narrow every day. Sometimes it's so difficult to say what is the difference between something that functions and someone that exists. Everything is also connected to the roots of what we are used to call artificial intelligence, you know, the Turing test about intelligence. And it's something that is really connected to how we flipped out the source of Western philosophy. Because in Turing perspective, there is a test beyond the wall in which a machine can confound you if it's a machine of a human being. It sounds to me really the opposite of what Plato was used to say in Republica, in which the shadow of something projected on the wall is not enough to know the difference between what is projecting the wall. So when we say one to one another, shadow is enough, we say that we don't care about the difference. It's enough that it works, and it works well. So philosophically, this is the problem, and to solve this problem, we should be able to find a new, shareable, workable understanding of what is a human being. There are other books in which I try to define this, and I point on language, syntactic language, as the ability of the human beings to be what the human beings is. For the last 70 years, we start to study our language in the Chomsky way, like as syntactical tools, subject, verb, object. You can switch the language, but the syntactic remain the same. And this is probably because it's connected to how our brain is. But if we focus on language in that perspective, it's like to say that a hammer has an handle made in that form because our hands can pick it. We still not answer to the most important question. What is the hammer for? So why we developed this form of technology, language? Well, if I say to someone, I'm sad, I allow another member of our species to see something that is invisible. One moment in the flux of my emotion. So language is a tool that allows the imagination of another member of my species to see something that is invisible. This tool allows us to imagine, to communicate something that is imagined, to shift in time something. Because if I talk to you about Napoleon is not anymore visible, but with my words, I can make it visible. I can make in some way achievable by you. A myth is something that becomes visible thanks to language. So we are not animals in the sense that we are not so well shaped by instinct. The duty is visible thanks to language that expresses the law. Morality is visible thanks to language. But language is not a general purpose technology. If I have to try to explain you with words how to make a knot, take, rope, turn, it's too difficult for me in English, it's much, much easier to let you see. This is why the YouTube tutorials are so successful. So language is not good for everything. And language changed during the time. At one point, we make the press. A renaissance happened. There is a wonderful book of Eisenstein on that. Now the language is computed. And the machine is a machine of language. And something new is happening in society. Okay, I know that the topic of defining human beings is too big, but simple. I would like to stress you some perspective to understand why technology has to be understood in a new way and not simple like a tool. Last sentence on that. Technology is not something that happened. It's a structured answer to a reality that impinges on us. So if I feel myself threatened, I can develop a technology that is a rifle. But in some way, the fear that I feel remains inside the rifle. And every time that I look at the world through the scope of a rifle, the scope invites me to divide the world between friends and enemy. And this is a sort of, in some way, epistemological lenses between me and the reality. You can read all the innovation driven by microscopy and telescopy in the same way. So this is just to attempt to say in which sense I talk about techno-human condition.
Excellent, thank you so much. Now, I will at some later point come back to Nora and John, but I'd like to go to the audience now for questions. So Dominic and then Tanya. So can we have those questions one after the other, take them as two, and have them as questions? I mean, I'm saying this to everyone. And could you also just say who you are? When you speak in the microphone, don't be put off by the fact that your voice isn't amplified, because it's only for people listening online. Okay, Dominic.
Thanks. Dominic Burbage. I'm actually a research associate in the Institute for Ethics and AI. I wanted to ask, without treating the whole question of human nature, what is the panel's view of freedom? It seems to be an assumption that freedom is a good thing, and I don't know why. So it seems to be an assumption of the sort of post-war, post-ideology world where we have known a time of totalitarianism and indoctrination, and we assume a sort of democratization across the world is all a good thing, and then we fear nudging is a sort of creep towards totalitarianism. But if it has good outcomes, why should we avoid a reduction of freedom?
Thanks very much. My name's Tanya Sorden. I'm a professor of law from Australia. I want to thank each of you for some very interesting comments and also for Father Benanti's talk. As I understand what Father Benanti is saying is he was talking about AI in the context of AI as an agent, as well as perhaps coming back to a notion of a separate personhood and then maybe taking us to transhumanism. And on the other hand, the good professor who raised these issues really saw AI only as an agent. And so both of you, I suppose, raised issues around what free will means in these contexts. But I want to come back to Professor Benanti, because it seems to me that it's not just around syntax, it's also very much around cultural context as well, in that every single one of these ethical ideas has such a completely different meaning within a different culture. And I was thinking about my own Indigenous culture, where the examples that you gave would be, I think, reflected on very, very differently. And I wondered how we might deal with that question of cultural complexity and cultural context within this ethical framework. And I also was curious about this idea that really the professor raised, saying that you only had enhancements really where there was a question of disability, when it just seems to me that many of the modern enhancements that we're looking at now are applying when you don't have a disability, but are around enhancing and improving human function. Thank you.
Okay, so there are two questions there. Why is human freedom important, especially in the context when maybe uses of algorithms that are in some sense manipulative, if they bring about better results, why should we worry about the diminution in human freedom? And the second point is, are these ethical questions around AI transformed deeply by diversity and cultural context? Father Paolo, do you want to begin?
Yeah. Well, I think that all the foundational reasoning on society in the modern age was about the possibility of the individual to stay free in the front of collectivity. And, you know, freedom as a threshold of legitimacy of democracy probably is what we achieved, yes, of course, after World War II, where a lot of regime simply denied that. And with the Declaration of the Human Rights, we set that as a threshold. In one sense, freedom is connected to a society that allows you to choose your hands, to choose your path, to choose your trajectory inside society. Is freedom alone enough? No. Is freedom to be absolute, in the sense that not connected to other things that could, in some way, reduce the freedom? That is not true, too. Because when you drive a car and you have to buckle up, this is a diminishing of freedom, but it's accepted in the name of a greater good that is your healthy if you make an accident. So I agree with you. Freedom as an absolute, it's not something that we want. But denying freedom is something that simply cancels the threshold of what we call a legitimate form of society for what we understand after the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It is interesting that John Rawls was saying about the formal constraints, about rule of law, that sometimes form of diminishing of freedom could be much more efficient, but they are not according to the rule of law. Now, the problem is, why an efficient system is so important? Because democracy has a really huge lack of efficiency. And this is probably one of the root of the crisis of democracy nowadays. But the democratic process, and this is my fear, has not to be understood as an algorithm, as a social algorithm. I have the feel that sometimes we acquire algorithm as an epistemology to understand any kind of processional process inside society. And so if something is low, project a better one. So if it took too much computational power, change the algorithm, upgrade it. Well, I think that this is a lack. I'm not only what you are saying, I now jumping a little bit over on that. This is a lack of reflection on how this processional thinking that we can summarize as an algorithmical view of life is in some way the best way to describe everything that happened through a process. Also, emotion could be understood as biological algorithms. If you see a baboons, the most similar monkey to ourselves looking at DNA, you can say that a baboons, the baboons that you see is the son of the daughter of the best two emotional algorithm compatible baboons on the earth, because they was aware and able to match one with the other. And with this perspective, we simply canceled 30th century of writing in culture about something that we was used to call love. Love could become a biological algorithm that allow a process that is the not extinguishing of the species. I'm not telling that is true or is not true, but cannot be not reflected and injected in our approach to what we have in the front of us. It has to be epistemologically discussed. And then probably we will find much more algorithmical process And we define that some processes that are much more connected on quality, like the moral judgment, cannot be surrogated by calculus. And it's interesting because there is a little book on the 70, Utilitarianism, Pro and Against. And in the first section, there is this dreaming, pro-utilitarianism, to be able to achieve an objective calculation of moral judgment. So probably after 50 years, we are still there. Pro or against?
Can I just pick up a little bit the point about culture? So one of the interesting issues that you raised was the potential tension between algorithmic governance and the traditional values of the rule of law. And you talked about how they might conflict with notions of, you have to be able to know what the law is, but we don't really know what the algorithm is, or we have to have generality, universality. But you also referred to Kahneman. Now, Kahneman is a big enthusiast for replacing the law with algorithmic decision-making. So he gives the example of asylum seekers in America. In front of some judges, you have an 8% chance of getting asylum. In front of others, you have an 88% chance of getting asylum. So the thought here would be, yes, you're right, these are aspects of the rule of law, but another aspect of the rule of law is consistency. And it shouldn't be that I'm in a lottery on a life and death matter, like whether I get asylum. Now, one thought would be, maybe different trade-offs will be made amongst the elements of the rule of law in different cultures. But I thought maybe you were suggesting something a bit stronger, that there are domains where the rule of law simply rules out the use of algorithmic decision-making.
Yeah, probably the short answer is yes. Why it's more complicated to justify? And the thing is, let's approach it in an historical way. In every time, in every culture, we pick someone special among us to do some special job. One was the priest, now it's out of fashion. Another one is the doctor, and another one is the judge. Mm-hmm. Not because they was without faulty possibility, but because they apply themselves in the best way that they can to that job, to that kind of decision-making system. A doctor is a decision-making system on your health. It's a form of judgment on your health. The same thing happened to a judge. Well, this idea that an algorithmical computational tools is less faulty is simple and true, as all the technical applications are showing us. Also for other things. For example, these tools are based on data. Well, the classical computational theory say that in a classical algorithmical way, it was built in a series of sentences. If this, then that. That is a surrogation of a judgment with computation. So you don't see it, but someone judged it before you see it. So you are simply moving the chain, but it's the same things. Not here, but someone did before. Now, this idea of machine learning, in which acquiring data, the machine is learning how to behave, show there are some kind of systematic choices that arise in the pool of choices that we are used to call bias. And I would like to use bias in the most general possible way in English. Bias towards, bias against. Because if you have an algorithm that has to choose which kind of drugs you have to take to keep you alive, I would like that he has a bias towards your life. So judgment is a bias also in a positive way. Between being honest and not honest, I'm biased. I would like to have honesty. Well, there is this idea that because it's a calculation and still is utilitarianism pro, is much more objective and neutral. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of situations in which this is not true, especially one, now in my mind, I would like to point in your face. A lot of government is switching to have, and this is a really painful page for myself in my country today, to the reconnaissance of refugees status, not anymore hearing the history of someone that is begging to be a refugee, but analyzing the data that this woman, man, child, adult, elderly can produce at the frontier. In the name of the fact that the algorithmical process is much more objective than the human judgment. Now, the problem now is not on the algorithm, it's on the bias that we have on human beings. It's not on the fact that the calculator can calculate, but the fact that the human being can change his mind is a problem in the process. For the first time, this is a problem. Now, imagine, I would like simply remain on practical side. You are coming in a place in which if you leave data, someone will kill you because you are a refugee. And when you arrive to my border, what I tell you, what's your name? Give me your data. Now, from my ethical perspective, the way in which interact with the less important people in society, people that have no right from where they arrive and are still no right here, is the value that we give to the human beings and nothing more. This is the problem behind that, and we have two bias, negative way. One, the variability of judgment of the human being is a problem of the human being. B, calculation is always fair and objective. Both are false.
Okay. So I want to give Honora and John a chance to speak now, and then if there's time, we'll get a further question. So Honora, is there anything you want to pick up
I'll
on?
say something very short, which picks up on your last point. I think that, yes, calculation gives out at a certain point, and that is why I tried to stress the importance of judgment and the ineliminability of judgment in a great deal of human affairs, and also the variety of types of judgment that we cannot avoid making, but for which we cannot provide algorithms.
John, can I just also add, there was some interest also online about the idea of AI being applied in legal adjudication, whether this would be something that could realistically help us deal with the massive backlog of cases, the fact that access to legal justice is prohibitively expensive for many people. So perhaps you might also include some thoughts about that.
Well, I mainly want to put in another plug for David Hodgson. David Hodgson's first book, his doctoral thesis, was called Consequences of Utilitarianism. And he demonstrated that if we were able, which we cannot do, if we were able to make the calculations about effects and weigh the values and disvalues of the projected effects, the consequences of successfully applying utilitarianism would be very bad, in a more or less uncontroversial sense of bad. And he demonstrated that in relation to a variety of things, including, although I think possibly this chapter dropped out of the thesis in the book, dropped out of the book from the thesis, one about the doing of justice in respect of criminal and breach of contract and negligence in anything relating to the past. So one of the consequences of adopting utilitarianism successfully is that nobody can make a promise. Promises drop out. Telling the truth, swearing an oath and telling the truth is more or less meaningless. If the consequences of lying would be better and could be calculated to be better, then there's no case for telling the truth. So it would not be possible to set up a system, anything like our justice system, so forth. He then became a judge. He became probably the best judge that Australia has ever had, although he never went to the highest court because these things are not decided by merit in every respect. And both his great books on the reality of human intelligence and its distinction from from machines and the reality of mind as distinct from every kind of sophistication of matter and the existence of free will. Both of them include extensive reflections on the many kinds of what Honora was calling judgment, but he parses that out into a variety of well articulated phases of intuition or gestalt, as he talks about it, starting with the kind of gestalt that we all have at the level of consciousness before we start to conceptualize, in which we see the scene as a stable scene. We move our head and we see the scene. The brain, in this case, is performing what Hodgson, with some risk of equivocation, it's an analogy, a gestalt, is giving us a unified presentation of a scene of incredible diversity and involving movements which should, in a certain sense, deflect the stability and unity of our perception, through to all the kinds of judgments that a judge or a juryman has to make in assessing everything, almost everything about the past, including, of course, the one very sophisticated end, the truthfulness of witnesses, extraordinarily complex, far beyond the projectable abilities of any AI machine, and every other question that arises about onus of proof and so forth. All these are well outside. Of course, you can program a conception of onus of proof into an AI system, but all the input that really matters before you get to, well, that's the balance, is I think very. It's unusual that it's studied in the kind of perceptiveness and articulacy that Hodgson had, and he's a writer of the utmost clarity. Unlike me, he's devoid of rhetoric, and it's a pleasure to read.
And just to complete our collective inferiority complex about Hodgson, he wrote these books on the train every morning on the way to work as a judge. So it's quite remarkable. We have time for one more question, but we have to have a hard stop at 6:30. So is there a question from anyone here? No? Then, Father Benanti, oh, there is a question? Sorry. Charlotte, yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Yes.
Can I just say we've literally got 3 minutes, so if we can keep it short and the response short as well.
Great. Thank you. I really enjoyed this. My question is about the phenomenon of algo-activism or algorithmic resistance, so this idea that people can creatively deal with technology and maybe even, trick technology and creatively find workaround solutions that work for them. I was wondering whether that kind of phenomenon should make us feel more hopeful about the techno-human condition, whether it might be another way of countering or escaping algocracy. I guess that's a short version of my question. Thank you.
Really short. Well, the effect is not guaranteed, like everything in life. We know different models around the world. But also if you look at the IT company, there are IT companies that come from the classical East Coast model, IBM. Then you have IT company that come in a new model, but is still classic, Seattle, Microsoft. Then you have strange company that arise from the conjunction of California counterculture, hippies, and they are the Silicon Valley unicorn company. So probably the best answer should be appealing to an anthropologist, Edward Shane, and the leadership culture. So every time that we organize a tech company or this use of technology, we are setting a culture that is like the hidden part of an iceberg. We see just the part that surface, that is the tools, but behind the tools there is a really different understanding of value and shared value. In this sense, your question is really interesting. So if I ask to my phone, can you help me to commit a suicide? At this point, the culture behind this phone produced that AI is halted. There is an instruction that someone wrote. This is an example of Algorethics, a guardrail. And the instruction tell to the machine to tell me this is the list of center against suicide nearest to you. So this idea could change things, but could also produce a lot of problematic stuff. If you apply to the car, we cannot modify the car for the safety of everyone.
Thank you very much. I think everyone will agree that was an incredibly rich and fascinating discussion from Father Benante, and 2 really excellent and incisive comments. So can we please thank the speakers, the commentators, and thank you all for your presence and your participation. Wonderful. And we finish on time.